Welcome to this session about financial aid. We're at the Sage Scholars Virtual College Fair. This is the second session of the day. There'll be a third session after this, which will split the upperclassmen from the underclassmen. So check out that. My name's Nicole. I'm going to be sort of the facilitator of this. I'll be asking the questions you want to ask and things like that. I just wanted to give a little brief kind of orientation about Sage Scholars, what we're about, and introduce obviously our expert in financial aid, which is a topic that I think is on a lot of our minds. So the first thing to know is that Sage Scholars is the sponsor of this fair, and they are a membership organization. And actually, let me share my screen really quick so that you can check out a little bit about them. So Sage Scholars is a membership organization that works with over 200 okay, one second, there we go. Works with over 425 private colleges and universities in 46 states, and millions of families, from parents, grandparents, and kids that are joined together in the common goal of making private education more accessible and affordable. So higher education, private or public, is a wonderful goal to ascribe to, but private higher education has many unique advantages, including higher graduation rates, fewer years to graduation, smaller class sizes, and better post-college jobs and graduate school outcomes. Sage Scholars, since 2018, has worked with over 10,000 students who have applied to member colleges and universities and guaranteed over $260 million in scholarships from those colleges. And in addition, the Sage Scholars organization has made a 5-year commitment to provide $1 million in hard dollar scholarships to fund its own students. So if you want to learn more information about the Sage program, I mean, you probably already know if you're here because you are in it, you can go to the Sage website, which Abram, our producer, has put in the chat. And if you have a specific question about your Sage account, we ask you to email the support@sagescholars.com, which we'll put in the chat now. They'll be able to look up your specific Sage ID and actually pull information about your account. So if you do have a specific question, please email them. If you want more general information, the Sage Scholars team has a booth with the colleges at the college fair portion of this, so you can stop by and ask them your general questions. And, you know, I just also want to remind you too that today is a pretty ambitious day. I get that we have a lot going on. We're attempting to serve people in a lot of different time zones and who are at different points in their high school career. So, you know, please treat this like you would an in-person seminar and take breaks when you need them. You know, just at a live conference, you'd enter and leave the room. That's totally normal, and we totally expect that. For those people who are participating, you know, meeting with the colleges later and things like that, we're going to be able to see participant data, and we're going to be doing some drawings for a $100 Amazon gift certificate for 5 lucky people who are attending this today. Also, we have an opportunity for high school seniors to earn a $1,000 scholarship if they matriculate to a member college that is participating in this fair. So the Sage team can answer some questions about that. If you look in the participation window, so if you hover on the bottom of your screen, you can click on participants and see the participant window. My Sage colleagues have indicated that they are with Sage with their name. So if you have questions about the Sage program and things like that, they can answer them in the chat, or you can visit them at the booth. So before we get started, just really quick intro. Abram is my co-producer, and he is going to be aggregating your questions in the chat. He's also able to help you if you have specific issues. So if you are having technical problems or things like that, please flag down Abram. If you do have a question to ask, we ask that you just type in the word question in all caps and type it in the chat. That way, if there's some back and forth, we do not miss your question. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker. This is Chris Rone, who is the Associate Director of the Office of Financial Aid at DePaul University. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spotlight Chris here, and we are going to let him share his screen and his presentation about financial aid. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and welcome everyone. Good morning to those of you who are in the Midwest, as I am, and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. My name is Chris Rone. I am the Associate Director of Financial Aid for New Student Programs at DePaul University in Chicago. For folks who may be unfamiliar with DePaul, we are the largest Catholic university in the United States with a total enrollment of 23,000 and an undergraduate enrollment of 15,000. So what I'm going to do today is certainly aimed at the rising seniors. You guys are rising juniors, or you're very spunky and you're here as rising sophomores, or you're about to graduate from middle school and become a freshman. You can vaguely file this away in the back of your mind and then just reach out to your parents in 2, 3, or 4 years when you're actually going to go through the financial aid process. But for seniors, everyone who is on this call, you are really going to want to complete the FAFSA application. If there are several takeaways from the session. Takeaway number 1 is there's literally no downside to completing the FAFSA process. So the way I have this presentation set up, the first half is to guide you through how you go about applying for financial aid. And the second half is to kind of show you the output, meaning once you have been admitted to 1, 2, 3, 10 colleges, and they have your FAFSA record, you're going to receive a financial aid award. So we're going to look at the components of a financial aid award, so you kind of have a preview of what you're going to be looking at shortly after January 1 of 2022. So I will get started. So first of all, FAFSA is an acronym that stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid, operative word being free. There's absolutely no cost to completing the FAFSA application. Technically, the FAFSA is what makes a student eligible for governmental financial aid, which means eligibility for the student loan program and the ability to get a work-study job on campus, and of course, eligibility for grant funds or free money based on your family's financial circumstances. The most famous of all programs is the federal Pell Grant. Anybody who's done any research has heard about Pell, and we're going to break down eligibility for Pell a little bit later. But at the starting point, you're going to want to complete this application. The application will open for the 2022-23 school year, October 1st of 2021. So if I have some parents on the call today who have not done FAFSA in, say, 10 years because you had older children or you remember doing it for yourself, say, wait a second, how can you do the FAFSA October 1? It used to be that you could not complete the FAFSA until after January 1, which was very logical. If the student is starting,
I was doing it.
If the student is starting college in either August or September of 2022, the logical income basis would be the prior year, right? So you would wait until after January 1 of 2022, and you would complete this application using your 21 income information. Well, that changed about 6 or 7 years ago now, with the logic being, and this was based on research that indicated that first generation college students had a tendency to complete the FAFSA late and potentially miss deadlines for scholarship and grant opportunities. So they moved it up to October 1st, which is coincides much more with the admissions process timeline. But what this means is, if you're completing this in October or November, then the income basis cannot be 2021. So when this process opens on October 1st, you may complete the application and you want to populate that with your 2020 income information. So what has changed is you do this a couple of months before January 1, and it means the most objective income basis at that point would be your most recent tax filing, which will be for calendar 2020. And some of us are struggling to get those numbers together right now and are happy that the government extended the deadline to May 17th. So in order to complete this application, which logically is completely online, you have to have identifiers. So my very strong advice is to, rather than simply accessing the FAFSA at studentaid.gov, which is in the next slide, on October 2nd or October 5th, whatever, you want to go to this website, So you want to take a picture of this slide. This is where you go to create something called an FSA ID, which is basically your user ID and FAFSA, your user ID and password that act as your electronic signature for the FAFSA. So you could simply go and complete the application and create the student and the parent ID on the date you're doing it. However, those IDs are only good for signing the FAFSA. The reason you want to do this a couple of days before is, and this is much akin to setting up, say, an account on an online banking or other financial services account, right? You're going to create a user ID. You're going to create a password. You're going to have 4 security questions and a bunch of other hoops to jump through. So when this information is created, because the ID and password are linked to your name, your social security number, and your date of birth, that information is sent to the Social Security Administration to confirm that this submission with this name, social security number, date of birth match their records. That process takes 24 to 48 hours, and you will receive an email saying the Social Security Administration has confirmed your status. The reason you want to do this is because the best way to complete the FAFSA application is to complete it and have your tax information transferred directly from the IRS database to populate the FAFSA. And I will explain why this is important as we move through. So here we are at the slide, which indicates where you go to complete the financial aid application, the FAFSA application. And that is the website studentaid.gov. And you can see, hey, if you're new to the process, start here. So again, you could do this in one fell swoop. Go here, create the IDs, and then complete the application and sign it. But what would be missing is the ability for you, I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to jump back. The ability for you to populate the FAFSA, pulling your tax information out of the IRS database, because logically, if this 24 to 48 hour process of confirming your identity has not been done, then you can't pull your tax return back. So what do you need to complete the FAFSA? Or what are the indices of this formula that determines how much financial aid someone is eligible for? Well, again, it's going to be based on 2020 tax information. So the parent's adjusted gross income, if the student worked in 2020, whatever the student's income was, the number of people living in the household that the student resides in, etc. So these are kind of the data elements. And when you complete the FAFSA, you may send it to as many as 10 colleges at one time. And I sincerely hope I don't have any parents in the session today who have a child who's about to put them through a 15 college application pool. But if that is the case, you are not limited to these 10 schools as a maximum. You can just put 10 on one time. So let's say somebody has a very large pool. You've applied to 12 colleges. You get admitted to 11 of them, and you had your FAFSA sent to 10. Well, by the time we get to admissions and financial aid awarding time, I'm sure a couple of the schools that you were admitted to and you initially sent your FAFSA to, you won't be interested in any longer. What you would simply do is go into the FAFSA and remove those schools to make room to add additional schools. And when you remove a school, that's not retracting your information from that school. It just simply means they're not going to get any further updates unless you go and put them back on. But that is how the increments of 10 work.
Hey, Paul, we just have a quick question, which is that it's the parent that's filling out and making this ID, right?
Both. It is
both. Okay.
FAFSA. It is the student's FAFSA, right? So students, so you have to be able to identify the student. And if it is a 2-parent household, both parents don't have to do it, just one does. But that is how they are signing the FAFSA for a dependent age child. And far more importantly for my business, being able to put their financials in and complete the information. So both the student and the parent. There's a slide later in here, so let me back up for a second for first timers. It would be fabulous if you were completing one FAFSA application per family. You complete one FAFSA application per student. So if I have any folks in today who have twins who are coming in, you are not doing this once, you are doing this twice, because this is tied to the individual student, even though you are logically completely duplicating your information. Okay, so this slide shows the different sections of the FAFSA. For 26 years that I've done this, characterized the FAFSA as a hybrid between a tax return and a job application, meaning you are putting in personal demographic information. And what happens is when you apply for and receive the FSA ID, and then you go in to complete the FAFSA with this information, it's going to pull the biographical information because that's what you needed to create your FSA ID, right? Your name, your social security number, your date of birth, your address, your email, your phone. So then you can move it very quickly to the school selection section, where again, you can populate it with up to 10 schools. Questions about dependency status that are just sorting whether a student who is coming straight out of high school may be considered independent, and that is dependent upon whether they're in a legal guardianship situation or things of that nature. And then you get to the parent demographic section, and then you get to parent financials, which is what we're going to focus on. Okay. So again, the reason I am strongly urging people to get their IDs set up prior to completing the application is so that when you get to the parent financial part, you can utilize the IRS, what we refer to in the business as the DRT, or the data retrieval tool. So when you get to this point in the FAFSA, you're going to click on this link and it is going to transport you to the IRS Gateway. And again, because this ID you have set up is tied to your name, your social security number, and your date of birth, this is how you can get to the last identification hurdle before getting your tax information, which is you must enter your address exactly as it appears on your tax return. So again, we're looking at stuff that's a year and a half behind. So if anybody is in the scenario where you're about to file your 2020 taxes, but you know that sometime in the next few months you're going to move somewhere else, you would not use your current address. You would use the address that you used on your 2020 tax returns. You do that, it is going to say, okay, do you wish to transfer your tax data to the FAFSA or not? You click the I wish to box as an additional piece of financial protection. In the early days of this functionality, it would show you exactly what your tax information was. Your 2020 adjusted gross income was $46,800. Your tax paid was $1,800. But a couple of years ago, they changed that so you will not see the numbers. I mean, this is the actual information that you filed with your tax returns, but it's not going to show you the numbers. You're just going to say transfer to FAFSA. It's going to populate the FAFSA, and then you move on. So what will happen next is you get to the part in the FAFSA where it is signed so that it may be submitted. So there's going to be a student signature. Again, this is the student's FAFSA. That has been accessed with the student's user ID and password. So that's how we know it is the student. They click sign the FAFSA and it is electronically signed by them. And again, whichever parent, and if biological parents are divorced, whomever is the custodial parent is the parent who is completing the FAFSA. So that is who has secured this FSA ID and password. They go in and enter that information, and then they sign the FAFSA, and you get a congratulations, you have successfully navigated the FAFSA process. Both the student and the parent will receive an email saying you've successfully submitted your FAFSA, and the next day a second email, we have processed your FAFSA and sent the results to the schools as indicated. So kind of tricky, how do I complete the FAFSA questions? So I kind of started on this a moment ago. FAFSA eligibility is based on the household income, family size, structure in which the student resides. So in English, if biological parents are divorced, but whomever the custodial parent is remarried, then it is your household income. It is going to be mom and stepdad or dad and stepmom. It is not, I am divorced from the biological parent. I am remarried, but the step parent doesn't have anything to do with this. It does not work like that. That is an absolute bedrock, non-negotiable issue. Every year, whether you're talking about dealing with my colleagues at a community college financial aid office, a four-year public, a large private, a small private, that is not up to the school. So I will say it again, because people will miss this. When you get to the part in the FAFSA where you are listing household size, how many people live in the household, how many children in the family are in college, that is the total household within which the student resides, not the biological parent's half of that household. In terms of asset assessment, the FAFSA is very reasonable in that the assets that are excluded are equity in primary residence and balances in retirement accounts. So when they are asking you for savings for cash savings, that's what are your balances in your savings and or checking accounts. If you have investment funds that are not tied to retirement and not tied to the equity of your primary residence. And again, as I said earlier, it is one FAFSA per student, not one FAFSA per household. Okay, so here's a quick heads up, because I led with technically the FAFSA is what makes a student eligible for governmental financial aid. However, of the more than 4,000 colleges and universities in the country, at least 90% of us are using the FAFSA to measure eligibility for school funds. However, there are some schools that require additional financial aid applications. So for seniors out there, basically, if your academic profile is such that you are going to be looking at Ivy League colleges or Ivy League equivalent liberal arts colleges, then you are probably going to need to complete something called the CSS profile form, which you do pay for. There's a fee for completing the application and a fee for each school you send it to. But this is a very intuitive process. If a school has a $70,000 price tag and has extraordinarily rigorous admissions criteria, then they are likely to require the profile. Meaning basically, if a school costs $72,000 and you need a 35 on the ACT and a 4.8 GPA to get admitted, then that means they have a lot of money to give in financial aid. So they reserve the right to apply a higher level of financial analysis than the basic federal formula does. The second point is a rarity nowadays, and that is a school having its own institutionally specific financial aid application. I don't think you're going to run into that. Obviously, if a school had that, as you're moving through the admissions process, you would receive communications letting you know that you needed to complete that. So that is the process. That is how one makes sure that you are eligible to receive what my office does, the Need-Based Financial Aid Award, post your admissions decision, whether you were simply admitted to a school or whether you were admitted to a school with an academic merit scholarship that I know my colleagues discussed in the admissions panel. So obviously this is my school presentation. So all of the stuff in here is relative to DePaul University, but it can be extrapolated across all four-year schools and two-year schools alike. So first of all, again, for first timers on the most basic level, someone might think, you know what, let's apply for financial aid at school X and see what they're going to give us so we can know whether it's going to be affordable before we have the student apply to that school. Absolutely terrible advice if somebody suggests that you do that, because think about it this way. why would a school create a financial aid award for someone who is not admitted? Okay, so you apply for admission, you complete the FAFSA, and if the student is admitted to a school, the student is going to receive a financial aid award. It's as simple as that. But we do not create financial aid awards for people who are in the application process. It happens post-admit. So again, FAFSA opens October 1 for students who are going to start school in August or September of 22. Most of us do not do financial aid awards before January 1. You may find a couple of schools that get them out around December 15th. So I have on my slide notification February. We are usually around February 1. Some schools around January 15th. And I'm sure this was discussed in the admissions panel, but you see I have in here early action deadline November 15th. I would just urge everyone, if one of the schools or multiple schools in your pool have an early action program, and remember, early action just means you're applying early and you're getting admitted early. It is not the same as early decision where you're supposed to pick one school, and if you were admitted there, it's essentially a contract that you're going there. The earlier you apply, the earlier you admitted, the better position you are in from a financial aid perspective. So, you know, it's again fairly intuitive why one would do that. Okay. So what comes in this financial aid award? There are 3 sources of free money to help finance an undergraduate education. There's free money from the federal government in the form of the Pell Grant. There's free money from your state government. So obviously I have the information up here about the Illinois State Grant, but I'm sure there are folks in here from, say, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Most large populous states have grants in the same range. Let's say between $4,500 and $6,500. And the logical qualifier on free money from your state is it's only applicable if the student goes to school in state. If you are from Chicago, the state of Illinois is not going to give you money to go to school in Michigan or vice versa. So for many of the parents on this in this session, when you were an undergrad, you were Pell Grant eligible. So we have a lot of folks who have undergraduate degrees, who have moved on and done well in life, who have an expectation that because they were eligible for federal Pell, their child is going to be. This is why I have on the slide, and this is actually speculative. I am assuming because of income disruptions, we're going to be up to 1/3 of all college students nationally qualify for the next year. For this past year was actually 32%. So the maximum federal Pell Grant for this school year was $6,495. Okay, so it's probably going to go up to about $5,550 for when this group will be freshmen. And the Pell Grant is a sliding scale grant. For the purposes of example, I always use these numbers. A household size of 4 with 1 student in college with different income levels. So a student who comes from a family of 4, they're going to be the only one in college with an adjusted gross income in 2020 of $30,000 is going to qualify for that maximum federal Pell Grant of about $6,500. Conversely, a student who comes from a household size of 4, they're the only one in college, whose parent or parents have an adjusted gross income of about $58,000, $59,000, they're going to get a $1,200 federal Pell Grant. And anyone above that is not eligible. So now you guys see why only 1/3 of college students nationally are eligible for Pell. And it is sliding scale. So if you're in the low 30s, you're getting $6,500. If you're in the mid to high 50s, you're getting $1,200. If you're at 60,000, you're getting none. Okay, most state grants are not sliding scale. So for however many people in this session are from Illinois, our state grant is, congratulations, if you qualify for it by income, you get $5,340. Whether your family's income was on the $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 range or up to just barely qualifying for this grant, which I would say is family of 4, 1 child in college, up through adjusted gross income of between $67,000 and $70,000. And again, I think that is fairly close across most states. So what I've essentially just told you is, if you say have a household size of 4 and your income is above $75,000, you are not getting any free money from the federal government or from your state government. So that begs the question, as this is obviously an event focused on private colleges, and it is why programs like SAGE exist. How can we keep our doors open if someone is trying to choose between my university and their state flagship that is going to be $30,000 for tuition and housing with no aid, and my institution for folks starting this fall is going to be $57,000, 42 for tuition and 15 for housing? And the answer is, private schools give a whole lot of money away in academic merit scholarship and other types of scholarship. If you're looking at being an arts major and you're going to go through a portfolio-based admissions process, well, that's probably going to lead to you being admitted with a talent scholarship in that film or art, graphic design, game design, etc. I'm sure we've got some high school athletes out there, and if you're looking at the NCAA Division I level, there are athletic scholarships. My institution is an NCAA Division I school, and we also have theater and music conservatory. So all of the students who are either coming into our acting program or our music program, that admissions is audition based, and they receive scholarships based on their talent ranking in that, as you guys will receive scholarships based on your talent ranking in the sense of what's your GPA profile when you get admitted to a school. So my particular institution for the past year did $62 million for our incoming freshman class in combined scholarships and grants. So for terminology's sake, you want to understand that with the free money that is coming from the institution, scholarship is free money based on something other than financial circumstances. It's based on the student's academic profile, their skill set within a performance-based admissions, or something like community. I work at a Catholic institution. We have community service and leadership scholarships, and again, athletic scholarships. Grant is free money that is based on the student's family's financial circumstances. So just as a family could qualify for that federal grant, the state grant in state, they can qualify for a grant from the school itself.
Hey, Chris, we've got some questions coming in fast and furious.
Okay.
So just wanted to let you know.
I will take them after this last one because I would assume that a couple of them might touch on this. So we've talked about the good components of a financial aid award. We also have to talk about that other part that we all know about, and that is student loan. So the important thing, again, number one takeaway from this session with regard to this is it would be very logical for first-time families to assume that student loan eligibility is in some way variable based on how expensive the school is. If I want to go to DePaul and it costs $57,000 and I am from the state of Illinois and I don't qualify for that state grant, and I am looking at one of our in-state public competitors that the sticker price is $30,000, can't I borrow more at DePaul? And the answer is no. Student loan eligibility is governed by what grade level in college the student is. So if a student is a freshman in college, period, he or she may borrow $5,500 on a non-credit basis. As a sophomore, $6,500. As a junior, $7,500. And just when you think you're getting the hang of it, it does not go up between junior and senior year. It repeats at $7,500. So for every single student entering the four-year pipeline, if you use your FAFSA derivative non-credit based entitlement because you are enrolled in a degree granting program, student loan eligibility, and you finish in 4 years, you will have $27,000 in student loan debt, which translates into loan payments of right at about $250 a month for 10 years with no prepayment penalty. So now I am happy to take questions. I just wanted to get through all components of the aid award.
No, absolutely. And there's a lot to it. And I just wanted to make sure that we got to a few questions before we had to adjourn today. And what I'm going to do is actually put Chris's contact information in the chat. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, you'll be able to. But I had there's a question about international students. How do international students fit in with the FAFSA and other financial aid opportunities?
Short answer from me, which you've all figured out that I don't give short answers, they're not eligible for anything. Meaning, if you are an international student, if you are considering coming to college in the United States on a student visa, you are eligible for academic merit scholarships just as a domestic student would be. I thought they would have handled this in the admission session. The financial aid process is not open to you. So it's a very short answer.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. I kind of figured it might be. So there's a question about how do schools treat applications from older parents who have above average income but are nearing retirement and saving money for that? And related to that, if the parent is actually retired during the student's college time, how does that kind of come into play?
Excellent question. So my next slide was going to talk about special circumstances. Meaning, look, we're talking about students, and no worries at all. We're talking about students who are starting college in August or September of 2022, and you're benchmarked with an income basis is determining how much free money they get based on financial circumstances that is only as relevant as December 31st of 2020. And let's take the pandemic out of the equation. In a normal circumstance, we have 20 to 25% of families who are saying, wait a second, whatever is going on in August or September of 2022 is super different from what you see on my 20 taxes. And we can now magnify that by a factor of 200,000 with the pandemic disrupting 2020 and 2021 income. So in that scenario, it's two-parent household. One of the parents is a high school teacher who makes $78,000, who is retiring May 1 of 2021 and going to a $40,000 pension. It would logically not be fair to treat this family on the basis of that $70,000 income that was earned on the 2020 taxes when they're going to a $40,000 pension. So you appeal the aid award, you send the documentation to the financial aid office and they make adjustments. With regard to older parents and assets, I wish I had better information. In the not information, but a better answer in the sense of, if you remember my slide, I talked about the data elements and how FAFSA is reasonable in not assessing retirement or home equity. But for your other investments, there was part of that slide that said age of parent. So the older the parents, the larger their asset protection allowance is. So again, in English, if you've got 25 grand in savings and you have an investment property of which you have $100,000 of equity in, so you have 125 in assessable net worth. If the parents are 48, they have a lower sequestration against that amount than if the parents are 58. The closer you are to retirement age, the more of your assets, accessible assets, you are allowed to sequester. But the bad news is those numbers are much lower than they were 10 or 15 years ago. Meaning if you were in your mid 50s, they allowed you to sequester about 60,000 in assets. Now that's about half of that. So the number is less, but the assessment against that number is higher than it used to be. It was an excellent question.
Right. And we have a couple of questions related to, custodial and non-custodial parents. It sounds like the non-custodial parent doesn't have to fill out the FAFSA. Correct. But it sounds like they might have to supply their financial information.
That is only at those CSS profile schools that, again, there are 4,000 colleges in the country. There are about 120 that use profile. So candidly, if you have a kid who is in the Yale, Duke, Stanford, Vanderbilt, WashU, or elite liberal arts college pipeline, then the non-custodial parent is going to have to complete financials. For a regular public institution or a non-Ivy private, we are FAFSA only. If you're divorced, you're the non-custodial parent, you have nothing to do with it.
Okay, I think there was concern maybe that like the person isn't sharing their information. So if they admit it, if that's gonna detrimentally hurt
No, not
financially.
at a FAFSA
No.
school. They have
No.
absolutely nothing to do with it. Custodial parents only need be concerned if they have remarried and they thought that the step parents stuff was going to be excluded. Other than that, it's very straightforward.
Okay. And another question that's come in is it better to fill this out right at the October 1st time period, or it doesn't matter just as long as you do it before the deadline?
A kind of the latter, you know, but because it's not based on recent information, as long as you didn't file a super long extension and your 20s are done and have been processed by September 1st, so they're in the database, I would certainly do it by November 15th.
Okay, and we have a final question, which is probably a good final question to go out on with, which is like, how do 529 plans kind of fit into someone's financial aid picture?
529s are an asset of the parent. So that gives you a break in the sense that they would be applicable against that asset protection allowance. There was a time when the 529 was considered a student asset, and student assets are assessed at 20% with no protection. So 529, with the rationale being the parent is the owner of the 529, the student is the beneficiary, so the parent can change the beneficiary, so it is a parent asset, not a student asset.
Okay, great. And just so everybody knows, I put the slides as a PDF in the chat, so you can download them. Also, Chris's information is in the chat. If you want to save the chat to be able to reference information in it, you can click on the 3 dots right above where you type in the chat and click Save Chat, so you can save those resources. Chris, thank you so much for your expertise and your time today. We really appreciate it.
Well, it has been my pleasure, and know that everybody who is in the session today has a great head start.
Absolutely. And we invite you, we have one more SAGE sponsored session, which is happening starting at noon. We have for the seniors in high school, we have college during COVID. And for the underclassmen, we have preparing for college basically as an underclassman. So pick one of those sessions if you want to go there, and make sure you network with our colleges. There's over 50 colleges that are part of the college fair. It's a really good time to make those one-on-one connections, which we learned are really valuable. So we hope to see you in that session. Chris, thank you again, and we'll see everybody in the next session.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks. Have a good one.